Equipping the saints for works of ministry. What if we trained each other to serve the way that Jesus trained people? Kind of a fair question. How did Jesus train people, and how is that different from the way that we train people? I went to a very long period of school and spent a lot of money. And one of the things that I lamented in the recent book that I wrote was about the training and how unequipped I was for real life. Trained well for preaching, yes. Trained well to deal with life situations, no. It just wasn't something that we were taught. It was mostly lecture. It was sitting in the seat. For many, many years, we were strapped to a seat listening passively to a lecturer who stood before us, and we would take notes, and I have a laptop full of notes that I took through 9 years of school. But there wasn't hands-on, applicable, sitting with broken people as part of a requirement for that degree. And I contrasted that with my truck driving training. I've talked about this here before, but the truck driving training consisted of 3 weeks of half a day in the classroom, half a day behind the wheel of a truck. At the end of that 3 weeks, we were given a license. And then on the 4th week, we went out with a trainer and we sat in the truck beside somebody who was experienced. And they would have us drive about 50% of the time during that week. At the end of that week, if that trainer felt that we were safe, he would give us a check mark. They would hand us the keys to our truck. They would drop us off at that truck with our first assignment on the computer, and they said, go do your thing. I mean, think about that for a minute. 4 weeks of training. 4 weeks of training, that's it. And it was really good training. And one of the most effective parts of that training, at least for me, was the emotional impact and how they terrified you with the photographs of all the bad truck accidents. And they showed you, this is what happens when you let your guard down even for a minute. And they said, you are responsible for everybody out there on the road. You're responsible for all the people around you. You're responsible for the 7 sides of your vehicle, the top, the bottom, the left, the right, the front, the back, and everything inside of the cab. You're responsible for all 7 of those areas at all times. There's never any excuse. Never once did they say, well, in certain circumstances, accidents just happen. What they said was, all accidents are preventable. So get that mindset that if there's an accident, you probably did something wrong. Or somebody around you did something wrong and crashed into you. But the point is, they terrified us. They told us what to expect, but they didn't just give us horror stories, and they didn't just sit us in a classroom. They put us behind the wheel. They gave us responsibility immediately. And that's a lot like how Jesus trained his disciples. Here's what I wrote when I kind of lamented about the lack of applicable training. I said, in seminary, I was not taught to serve and disciple people as Jesus did. Think about my truck driving training for a moment. 4 weeks. They showed gruesome pictures of accidents from negligent drivers and warned us not to lose focus. Jesus, when he trained his disciples, didn't put them in a classroom for 9 years. He told them to follow him and painted a gruesome picture of what would happen. He said, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues. Matthew 10, 16, 17, which will be our passage for next week about persecution. And I said, Jesus told them to be humble, remove their rose-colored lenses, warned them to watch out for deceptive people, and sent them out into the community on their own. Contrast what Jesus did with what most of us are taught about treating everyone with respect no matter what. Turn the other cheek, don't cause ripples, grow the church, people are safe once inside the church, smile and nod along, and be the leader who has all the answers. It's quite a contrast, isn't it? And this year, we're talking about equipping the saints, and one of those things with equipping the saints is really getting people to be involved, to move beyond Bible study and to move into the application part. Just this morning, I'll brag on our teens for a moment. We met a couple weeks ago, and we brainstormed some ideas and said, how do we move beyond the classroom and actually serve people? How do we use this time in a meaningful way that will impact the lives of other people? And they came up, not me, they came up with all these ideas. And this morning we implemented the very first idea. And we just delivered frozen meals to Debbie, along with flowers and cards that the kids made. The teens hand-delivered it, all of this stuff to her. And at the end of that, Debbie broke down crying and said, "Thank you so much. You will never know how much this means to me." We've got to start inviting people into the lives of other people. We can't grow spiritually, numerically, or any other way. We can't grow by sitting behind our Bibles and not getting into the lives of people. Last week we talked about the disciples and kind of how Jesus hand-selected people who were just hard workers. They were common people. They were not really intelligent. We know from John and the way that John wrote on about a 3rd or 4th grade level. John was not very sophisticated. His Greek was very elementary. He didn't use big vocabulary words like Paul did. He was not well educated. In fact, most of the 12 were not well-educated people, but they were hard workers. And Jesus hand-selected people who would show up, who would be consistent, who are not afraid to step out into faith, and who would listen to instructions. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread this for a minute. And I think it's just really telling. And then we're going to kind of break this down a little bit. These 12 Jesus sent out. Notice it doesn't say these 12 Jesus kept with him throughout his entire ministry. Jesus sent them out on their own. He wasn't with them. These 12 untrained people, uneducated people, he sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand." How's that for a training for sermon prep? One sentence, literally. He didn't say, well, now here's how we're going to do Venn diagrams, and we're going to do sentence structures, and we're really going to brush up on your Koine Greek. John, you could use a little help, bumping that Greek up a little bit. He didn't say that. He said, go out and proclaim the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics, or sandals, or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. In whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. I think it's pretty interesting, and I'm going to unpack some of this stuff because this is really what jumps off the page at me. Here are his instructions. He's training his disciples, uneducated, working class people. He hand-selected them. Keep in mind, this is God in the flesh. This is Jesus Christ, Messiah, Son of God, Savior of mankind. He's training uneducated people to go out. They've not been with him for very long, maybe a couple months, maybe a few months at the most, and now they're on their own. He's saying, I'm going to send you out into these various towns and villages. You guys are on your own. I went back and earlier I talked about my training. 4 weeks. 4 weeks is all that I was trained before I was on my own. Literally 100% on my own. Jesus trained his disciples, probably not much longer than that. And here are the instructions that he gives them as he's sending them out. Go nowhere among the Gentiles. By the way, that would change later on, right? When Jesus ascended, he said, you're going to start preaching here in Jerusalem, and then you're going to go out to the ends of the earth. So this is a temporary thing. But he says, go nowhere among the Gentiles, nor the Samaritans. Interestingly, that was temporary as well, because we know that Jesus went into Samaria, and he met the woman at the well. And he revealed himself as the Messiah, and she went and started proclaiming to other people. Go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. These are pretty simple instructions, right? Here's what you're going to preach. This sentence, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. This is what you're going to preach. Here's what you're going to do. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out the demons. I don't claim power to be able to heal people, or to raise the dead, or to cleanse lepers, or to even cast out demons. But we can provide healing for people, right? This morning, the teens going over and delivering food and bringing flowers and making cards, handmade cards, and handing those to one of our members who's really been isolated for a long time, is healing. That's a healing thing, right? And then he tells them, take nothing extra, gold or silver or a bag for the journey, 2 tunics or sandals or staff. Take nothing with you, because the worker is worth its wages. It's worth food. People are going to feed you when you go out. You're not going to lack for food. By the way, this also was temporary. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus sends them out again, and he says, remember when I told you to take nothing with you? Did you lack anything? And his disciples replied, no, we lacked nothing. Then I tell you, for this journey, take a money bag. If you don't have a sword, go and sell your tunics and get 2 swords. He tells them almost the exact opposite here, and he says, it's okay to have things. But when he first trains them, he's training them what it's like to go out and to completely rely on God. And then he tells them, find out who is worthy, who is accepting of you and the message. And if they're accepting, let your peace come upon that house. If they're not, what's his message? Let your peace return to you and leave. We don't do this very well, do we? In the church culture, I see this so much, where people cling to really toxic, even flat out abusive people, even hiring abusive people, giving them a microphone and a pulpit. They hire abusive people, spiritually abusive, physically abusive, sexually abusive. They hire and give a microphone to abusive people for the sake of not losing any. And it makes no sense. This isn't what Jesus did. He said, if people are accepting of you and of me and of the gospel, let your peace rest on them. Stay there. If they don't, take your peace back. Remove your peace from that person and from that home. It will be worse for them than Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment. In other words, God will take care of judgment. It's your job to learn when to walk away. Imagine if we trained like this. I remember, let me back up for a second, because I mentioned last week that on Wednesdays, we're going through a book called Simple Church. Simple Church is really phenomenal because churches are moving towards simplicity. Simplicity works. Simplicity is effective. Our schedules get very weighed down. They get very busy. We get busy doing a lot of programs. We program churches into the ground. And Simple Church says, if a program isn't leading people through a process to get them from unborn non-Christian to born-again Christian who's out there actively serving and making more disciples, if you're not walking people along that process, if one of your programs is failing to do that, get rid of it. Don't justify, how you remember back 50 years ago when you went to this program and it made you feel good. Don't justify keeping a program that doesn't work. Make things simple. Make your schedule simple. Cut that program or tweak a program and make it work, but simplify. Don't keep adding things to your calendar. So we tend to judge success in the church with how well a church is doing in the moment. Well, the problem with that is that's very fluid, right? That changes often. A church that's highly successful today could be very unsuccessful a year from now. And we see this all the time with churches of all kinds of different sizes. Big churches, little churches. This idea of success is very fluid. What Jesus looked for is people who set goals. People who know what the goal is, how that goal is marked out in front of them, and they aim for that goal. Longevity. Sarah, I was just looking through pictures this morning. I saw a bunch of pictures of your dad standing at this pulpit. DP and I were looking for pictures, and you'll see why here in a little bit. But I was going through our old photo albums, and I thought people like your dad understood longevity. This idea that standing behind a Bible doesn't make disciples. You have to go out there. You have to go into the community. You have to plant churches. You have to talk to people. You have to get in the lives of people. You have to know people. You have to build relationships with people. But they have to know why you're doing that. It's not just to hang out with people and be friends with them. It's having this goal. It's having this purpose. It's having this longevity. And so we stand on the shoulders of people who've gone before us. And I think that's really incredible. So all that to say, I'll wrap up by saying, we are moving towards more simplicity. As we equip people, we're encouraging people to go out and just step outside and take a deep breath and push through the nervousness and feeling like you're unqualified and just talk to people about Jesus and serve them. Take food to them. Take cards to them. Call them. Actively serve people in the name of Jesus and invite them back to worship with us and invite them to fall in love with God. That's one of the things that we're looking at in the book Simple Church, is that one of the really successful churches that's a simple church, they move people through the process. Their process is loving God, loving your neighbor, and serving the world. And so to get people to love God, they invite them to worship. Because they say if people aren't falling in love with God in the first place, they can't love their neighbor. So we're going to invite them to worship, and that's the first part of that process. We get them to fall in love with God. And then we get them to love their neighbor by knowing their neighbor. And so they invite them into small groups throughout the week. And then serving the world, they move them once they've gotten locked into a small group and they get to know people. Then they encourage them to reach out and to minister to people, to serve people, to find ways to bless people. And they do each of those once a week. And those churches are thriving. They're thriving. So it's really a simple model, and Jesus laid it out for us. And I think we overcomplicate it oftentimes in the church. And we look for different ways to connect and different ways to build relationships. And eventually, I think we wear ourselves out. And Jesus' instructions for his disciples are so stinking simple and so effective. So I want to encourage you to go out this week and bless people. Find people who are struggling. Find people who are sick. Find people among our own who are struggling or lonely or sick, and reach out to them. Keep doing it. Keep serving. Think longevity. And God will bless those efforts. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on baptism, or anybody who has any prayer needs, we would encourage you to come up, or our shepherds will be in the back. You can go see them as we all stand and sing together.